Hi everyone, I'm super excited. This has been a much requested video, but this is on how to get full marks in your 9-marker AQA GCSE physical geography papers. So that's the paper 1, living with the physical environment paper. I know these questions are scary, but there's just a few things you want to look out for that will help guide your answers and make accessing those 9 marks far more straightforward. So we'll start with the tips and then we'll actually look at kind of a perfect answer. Now, the thing with geography is you can't just rote learn all the answers, guys, because they'll change the command word every single time, changing kind of the nuance of the question and the importance they're placing on it. So that's why it's important that you learn a strategy as opposed to just trying to rote learn answers. So my first tip is to understand the command word in the question. And there's all different types of command words, from compare, describe, explain, suggest, examine, assess, analyse, evaluate, discuss. So if it's a question to do with explaining, here it's important that you make sure you write about the causes of the geography shown in the pictures diagrams and that you don't just simply describe what you see in those pictures. Now, AQA often words questions, to what extent do you agree? But this basically means the same as assess or evaluate. So with these sorts of command words, what you're wanting to do here is use the evidence provided in the diagram or in the question to determine the relative significance of something. What's important here is that you talk about multiple factors and not just one in order to access the higher marks. And because of the use of the word assess and evaluate, often need to provide a conclusion with these sorts of questions. So based on everything you've written about higher up in your answer, fundamentally, what do you think is the right option to go with? And I think that's where so many people fall down, is they don't describe enough factors. Now, it doesn't really matter what the question is. You will have to make a direct reference to any of the pictures or diagrams provided in the question. So make sure you point out in your answer, what do they show and how does that relate to your answer? And again, to help guarantee those high marks, to reach the 9 marks, you want to be talking about any relevant case studies and explain how it supports your answer. Now with AQA, there is 3 marks available for your spelling, punctuation and grammar, which is actually a huge number of marks. So do make sure you spell and punctuate accurately, use correct grammar and use specialist technical geographical terms throughout. So I've just zoomed out a little because people do panic about the 9 markers, but regardless of what the command word is, like I said, you do need to get to grips with the command words, and I will make a separate video taking each command word in turn. These do actually tend to be the most common ones though. But the point is, whatever you write about, you must include multiple factors, and those multiple factors must come from 2 sources. The information, the diagrams provided in the question, as well as relevant case studies you studied either at school, in textbooks, on your own, using YouTube, whatever that source of material is that you're using. So I think obviously it's very important that I actually talk you through a past paper question so you can understand how to apply that scaffold. So choose either an earthquake or a volcanic eruption. Assess the extent, so there's the command words, to which primary effects are more significant than secondary effects. Use figure A or B and an example you've studied. So it's even telling you to use information from the paper as well as case studies. And here it wants us to choose our tectonic hazards. So have a look. Study figure A, a photograph showing an area affected by an earthquake in 2010, and figure B, a photograph showing an area affected by a volcanic eruption in 2006. argument's sake, I'm going to use the volcano. So I'll just label that here. So let's start by making notes on what it means by assess the extent, because it's important that before you start writing, you really narrow down what the question's asking and you don't just start writing blindly. You'll get disorganized, it won't be structured, and therefore there'll be no chance of you achieving those 9 marks. Don't be afraid to take time in the exam to think about your answer properly. So when it says assess the extent, you therefore need to describe both potential primary and secondary effects. That means primary. That means secondary. We need to give an opinion as to which we think is more significant, and then support that opinion with evidence, both from the image in the exam paper and our case study. So if we look at what I've written in terms of a structure, I'm hoping you can see, like, describing the potential primary and secondary effects of the volcano are probably the easier to access marks. It's this giving an opinion and supporting with evidence, which is probably what you guys find more tricky. I might even go as far as to do a little mini essay plan. So I'm going to start by describing the potential primary and secondary effects. So remember, the primary effects occur immediately after the volcanic eruption. We know that spelling, punctuation and grammar is going to be important, as well as using technical terms. So what happens in a volcanic eruption? Well, there's pyroclastic flows. So I'll just make a point of mentioning that there. We know that that's going to lead to death of humans and animals. Making sure to refer to figure B, I can see that land and property has been buried by the ash cloud. Now I'm ready to discuss the secondary effects. So that occurs weeks and months later. Could include things like flooding, landslides. What effect does that have on humans? Well, it interrupts food supplies, causes long-term closure of businesses. And then there's never one complete right answer in terms of what opinion you want to have, whether you think that the primary or secondary effects will be more significant. It's totally up to you which way you argue it, but what is important is that you draw a conclusion. So personally, I'm going to draw the conclusion that the secondary effects are more significant because these effects continue to impact communities for many years to come. So I'm writing there plus conclusion. So I personally feel like I'm ready to get going on this question. So the primary effects are events that occur immediately after a volcanic eruption, such as, and I'm being nice and technical here, hot pyroclastic flows, which cause the death of humans and animals by suffocating or burning. Land and property is buried under ash cloud really using our source here as seen in figure B. I feel like now would be a good time to introduce a suitable case study. The Mount Merapi eruption from 2010 included volcanic bombs which landed over 11 kilometers away, causing death and destruction. Now we'll describe the secondary effects occur in the hours, weeks and months after an eruption and can include flooding and landslides which interrupt food and water supplies, homelessness and the cost of relocating people who live close to the volcano. And now going back to my case study, the Mount Merapi eruption in 2010 led to 300,000 people having to leave their homes. So we've done a great job thus far of discussing the primary effects and the secondary effects. However, we're still not reaching the level 3 answers where we'll receive 8 or 9 marks until we assess the extent to which primary effects are more significant than secondary effects. And like I said, you don't necessarily have to agree with that. And in fact, I personally don't. But we do need to give a reasoned argument here. As you can see, I've run out of space, so I'd be using the extra paper they provide in the exam to say the following. The primary effects stated cause great physical damage and upheaval to local residents of the volcano. The buried village in Figure B may have experienced a loss of life to some of its inhabitants and livestock, and will cost a great deal of money to excavate and fix all the necessary services and amenities. And now I'm ready for my all-important conclusion, which personally I'm going to state here is that, however, although these effects may be more significant to the local communities, the longer-term secondary effects could continue to impact them for many more years to come. So it's quite a blunt statement, really. So to conclude, although these primary effects may be more significant to local communities, the longer-term secondary effects could continue to impact them for further years to come. So providing an answer like that, using my spelling, punctuation, grammar accurately, there's no reason why I wouldn't be awarded 9 marks. And like I was saying, this is not about rote learning this answer. This is not about you guys, screenshotting my answer here and hoping that this exact question comes up in your exam. For example, if they'd asked you about an earthquake, your answer really doesn't change too much. Again, you'd be talking about the primary effects straight after the earthquake. You'd be talking about collapsed buildings, people being killed and injured by falling masonry, broken water, gas and sewerage pipelines, downed electric power lines. You'd be, as always, referring to any images in the question. Again, look, fallen masonry, flattened infrastructure, damaged vegetation. Then you'd be talking about secondary effects which are specific to earthquakes as opposed to volcanoes. So that could be things like any tsunamis or aftershocks that are caused as a result of the earthquake event, leading to flooding, more loss of life, more damage to infrastructure. There could be fires due to ruptured gas mains. And then throughout, support your answer with a case study. So I could have talked about one in Nepal in 2015 when there was a huge earthquake of magnitude 7.8 on the Richter scale, which caused over 8,500 deaths with nearly 17,000 people being injured. So that's what I'd describe in the primary effects answer. The secondary effects for the earthquake event would be very similar to these volcanic ones. In terms of secondary effects, if I wanted to use my Nepalese case study again, I could talk about those landslides which were triggered, which destroyed the roads, meaning that communities are cut off, businesses are not operating in the way that they would ordinarily. There's a loss of tourism. Somewhere like Nepal, which is famous for hiking in the Himalayas, is going to be very strongly affected by this. And then again, the conclusion you would write, there's no reason why my blue conclusion here wouldn't work for the earthquake answer.